Hello, everyone. Welcome to another National Regulators Community of Practice event. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, traditional custodians of the land which I am on today. But I'd also like to acknowledge traditional custodians from all the lands that people are dialing in from for this event. I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us. I would further extend my respect and acknowledge Māori as Tangata Whenua and Treaty o Waitangi partners in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and pay my respects to Māori in attendance today. My name is Yung Nguyen, and I am the head of the National Regulators Community of Practice. I'd like to warmly welcome you to today's webinar, Navigating the Aged Care Act Legislative Reform. Today's session brings together not just the regulator, but also the sector that is impacted from these important reforms. And today's sessions will highlight the importance of bringing all stakeholders along on the journey to deliver better outcomes. Regulatory reforms have been a staple across many sectors across this country. And as a community of practice, we are delighted to be able to share the experiences from our community around different ways to navigate our own reform journeys. I'm pleased to introduce Jane Eldridge, the New South Wales NRCoP co-chair, who will be facilitating today's session. Jane.
Thank you, Dawn. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jane Eldridge. Welcome to the webinar. I am co-chair, as Yung said, of New South Wales chapter NRCoP with my co-chair, Matt Campbell. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the lands we gather on, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. I also pay my respects to the traditional lands from which you are joining us today. And I further extend my respects and acknowledge Māori as Tangata, Whenua and Treaty of Waitangi partners in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and pay my respect to Māori in attendance today. So before I get started, just a few pointers about our webinars. We'll be using the Q&A function in Zoom to post questions for our panel, and we'll be leaving some time at the end for those questions. So if you like the look of another question, you can just upvote it, so it'll move up the queue. Before I introduce our panel, I'm just going to start with a little bit of background to frame the discussion. So the New Aged Care Act 2024 came into effect on the 1st of November 2025, and this has been hailed as a once-in-a-generation reform. Notwithstanding, there's been significant aged care reform dating back to the late 1990s, and I think it's important to consider that reform to really understand the transformative nature of the current legislation. So just briefly, in 1997, the Aged Care Act was enacted to centralise the regulation and funding of aged care services in Australia. This was aimed to address all inconsistencies that existed across the states and territories of Australia. The aim of the legislation was to provide a unified national framework for the delivery of aged care, ensuring that services met specified standards for quality and safety. In 2008, the Aged Care Reform Strategy was introduced. The focus was on improving the care and quality and increasing availability of services for older Australians. In 2012, the Living Better, Living Longer packages were launched. This included funding for additional home care packages and support for aged care providers to improve services. In 2017, the Aged Care Sector Committee was established to provide advice on the future of aged care in Australia. And this led to further discussion on the need to reform. In 2021, the Royal Commission into Aged Care and Quality released its final report highlighting systemic issues in the aged care sector and recommending comprehensive reforms to improve quality and safety. The significance of this legislative reform is that it changes how aged care is delivered in Australia and has a fundamental focus on the rights and needs of older people. It represents a significant shift towards a more empowering and transparent aged care system that puts the rights of older people at the centre of the system. This marked a significant transformation. Now, as regulators, we recognise that embracing the perspectives of multiple stakeholders is really critical to ensuring that reforms are fit for purpose and they address the needs of the regulated sectors. And on that basis, I'm very pleased to introduce our panel of speakers who are from three quite diverse backgrounds, representing the interests of each function within the sector. So to our panel, first, Bronwen Jaggers. Bronwen is the Assistant Commissioner Engagement, Education and Communication, Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. Anne Liddell is Head of Strategic Policy, Ageing Australia. And Sharon Gudu, the Chief Executive Officer of Carers New South Wales. And Sharon is also a member of the New South Wales NRCoP SteerCo. Welcome and thank you for participating in this session today. To kick off the session and just to get the discussion underway, I'm going to throw a question to all of you on the panel, and that will give us an opportunity to just, get started. So I'm going to start with you, Bronwen, if that's okay, but same question for everyone. Since the reforms commenced, what is the most significant change that you're seeing from your perspective? And who do you think is feeling it most?
Thanks very much, Jane. Great to be here today, and greetings from Ngunnawal country here in Canberra. So the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission, and I'll just call us the Commission from now on to save us all time, we're the national regulator of Australian government funded aged care providers, and together with the Department of Health, Disability and Ageing and the Independent Aged Care Complaints Commissioner, we govern the Commonwealth funded aged care system. And under the new Act, we now have an aged care system that is built on safeguarding the rights of older people and putting them at the centre of their aged care experience. So here at the Commission, our regulatory priorities are to protect older people receiving funded aged care services, drive continuous improvement in the aged care sector, and to build confidence and trust in the aged care system. And the new Act and the framework that it sets up gives us a range of functions and powers to do this, and they're sort of in three broad categories that I'll touch on very briefly. The first category is safeguarding functions, and these are intended to uphold the rights of older people and protect and enhance their safety, health, wellbeing and quality of life. And to do this, we run the Serious Incident Reporting Scheme. That's where providers report to us about individual incidents, things that have happened in their care. We hold workers to account against a code of conduct that's set out in the legislation. We protect continuity of care by monitoring providers' financial viability and sustainability and proactively managing those risks. And we audit providers against a set of aged care quality standards, and we publish the results of those audits. And we use a range of data and intelligence, including reporting that all providers must undertake to conduct risk-based monitoring and investigations, and then we take, compliance and enforcement action where we need to. So that's sort of the first broad set of functions. The second set of functions, and one that I was really excited to see written so explicitly into the Act, are our engagement and education functions. And the Act directs us that we must learn from older people to build the capability of the aged care sector. So we are required to listen to the experience of older people, develop and promote best practice models for how older people, providers and workers engage with each other. And we're required to educate providers and workers and keep older people and others informed about their rights and obligations. So as someone in charge of comms and education and engagement, it's really powerful to have those functions explicitly written into the Act, and we're certainly sort of looking at how we do that in the new world. And then the third broad range is we have registration of providers functions, and everyone here who works for regulators today will be familiar with these, with this sort of function. So we're managing who enters the funded aged care market, how they participate in the system. We register providers to deliver care, and we can vary, suspend, or revoke their registration if we find that they don't have the capability, commitment, or capacity to comply with their obligations. There's also the Independent Complaints Commissioner, who reports directly to the Minister for Aged Care, but she is supported by the Commission. And she's responsible for our complaints functions, including running a process that upholds the rights of older people and resolves complaints or concerns with meaningful and restorative outcomes. So the Act has really been a step change for us in the Commission, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. So in terms of who's feeling it the most, I think that's really for Sharon and Anne to answer, but as the regulator, it's our job to be clear, to act in accordance with the new laws, and to support the sector to do that as well. It has been a big adjustment for us, but that's okay because that's our job. And certainly we have nearly 1,900 people, and we're all incredibly dedicated to our work and to our purpose, our why of turning up every day to protect older people and to build a better aged care system. So we've been really excited to work our way through the change. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Bronwen. That's a breadth of accountability and powers, really, isn't it? It's quite incredible. Now we'll go to Anne. So just to recap, Anne, since the reforms commenced, what is the most significant change you're seeing from your perspective, and who is feeling it most?
Thank you, Jane, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to speak to you today about aged care reform. Ageing Australia is a national peak body representing over 1,000 members who deliver services across residential care, home and community care, retirement living and seniors housing. We are committed to reshaping the future of ageing in Australia by fostering collaboration and driving meaningful change, making ageing a celebrated and fulfilling journey. I believe that reform of this magnitude is very impactful for the entire aged care ecosystem, but in particular for current and future participants and their families or supporters, as well as aged care providers who deliver care and services. As Ageing Australia represents the provider sector, I will focus my comments from that lens today. So in regard to who might be feeling it most, I think it's in regard to the provider lens, the different service types within aged care have experienced the reform journey differently. So if we take our point of, I guess, commencement of the results you see from the introduction of the New Aged Care Act on the 1st of November, as being driven from the final report of the Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety. This once-in-a-generation reform, as Jane mentioned, received broad and consistent support since the final report was released, and even before that time, in relation to supporting the aged care sector to transform and move towards a rights-based approach and improving the quality and safe care that the sector could deliver. In relation to the differences between the aged care programs, the residential care sector experienced reform quite early, and it was phased. There were many different stages of reform, but they happened at different times between 2021 and 2020, 1st of November 2025, when the legislation commenced. In relation to home and community care, there have been differences related to the way the programs have evolved from their legacy program. So in relation to the home care packages program, under the new Act, it became a new program called Supported Home. And that new program was entirely transformative and commencing on one date, where the entire reform commenced on the 1st of November. So our home care providers have experienced quite a different journey to our residential care providers, and at the moment are probably feeling the transition to the new Act most keenly in the sector. and particularly as one would expect with reform that occurs in a big bang style, experiencing a range of transition and implementation issues presently, being 3 to 4 months in. Our Commonwealth Home Support Program providers are grant funded. So while they have a different funding model to both residential care and supported home, and with them coming into the supported home program no earlier than 1 July 2027, they have been brought into the new Aged Care Act regime as part of the new regulatory model, and are also experiencing many transitional matters in relation to particularly governance and compliance, as well as some program design matters in the interface between Commonwealth Home Support Program and supported home. So I hope that gives you a sense of the diversity of the aged care sector as it relates to service types. And I look forward to talking further throughout the webinar.
Thank you, Anne. That's very interesting. Sharon.
Thanks, Jane. I'm coming today from Garigal land in North Sydney and pay my respect to elders past and present of the lands that everyone is coming from today. Carers New South Wales is the peak organisation representing the voice of almost 1 million carers in New South Wales, and we're part of the National Carers Network that represents around 3 million carers in Australia. More than half of carers in Australia do take care of older people. From a carer perspective, the most significant change that we're seeing since the reforms commenced is increased system complexity. And the people feeling it most are our family and friend carers who support older people. So they are usually the ones left trying to navigate what the person they care for needs. We know that the reforms have introduced a vast array of changes, including from a carer perspective, new terminology, new service arrangements and agreements, new pricing structures, particularly in relation to supported home arrangements. And while most carers do understand that these changes are well intended, they require a level of time, literacy and confidence that many carers just don't have. As a result, carers tell us that they're spending more time navigating the system on behalf of the older person they care for, rather than focusing on the actual care or their own work or their own well-being. So it definitely is having an impact on carers. When we see who's feeling it most amongst our carer population, carers who support people with complex needs, so for example, dementia or other complex needs for older people, those with cognitive impairment, those with limited digital access, there's such a requirement to interface with digital information. They're feeling it most acutely. And as I said before, carers are often acting as informal system navigators, but without feeling confident about that role. They're also struggling with the idea of being decision supporters and being formally recognised or supported in that role and understanding what that looks like in the context of the reforms. We also see a disproportionate impact on carers in regional areas where service availability and local capacity are already constrained, and also carers from Aboriginal and culturally diverse communities where the level of understanding of the reforms is more constrained, sometimes due to language barriers, sometimes cultural barriers, and culturally supportive services are not always available to those communities. I didn't mention when I introduced Carers New South Wales, so we also are one of the Carer Gateway providers in New South Wales. There are Carer Gateway providers across Australia. And one of the things that we are collectively seeing across the Carer Gateway providers is that carers, through the difficulty of understanding the reforms and navigating, are relying on Carer Gateway to help with that navigation. So there's this unintended impact on that service system, which we're watching closely. So just to sort of summarise those comments, carers do understand why the reform is happening and strongly support the direction towards better quality and safeguards. But the opportunity now is to ensure that implementation recognises carers as essential partners in the system, not invisible intermediaries, which is sort of how they feel at the moment. That's where we think that regulators and providers together can make the biggest difference. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Sharon. So what I took away from that is that regulatory reform is mostly, or in this case, supported, but still very complex, and transitioning impacts a lot, or the whole of the sector, really. And so I guess just thinking about that and sort of the implications of who and what is involved in transition. Sharon, I'd like to ask you a question, and while I've got you there, so you can stay off mute. The reforms are designed to put rights, dignity, and safety at the centre. How are these changes, and you've touched on some of this, how are these changes being experienced by carers and older people? And what challenges and opportunities are emerging? Can you expand upon that?
Yeah, and I did touch on this a bit. From the carers perspective, there is definitely widespread support for the intent of the reforms to put rights, dignity, and safety at the centre. And carers see that intent in the stronger language around quality, safeguards, and supported decision making. However, it's the translation of that into reality for carers that is more difficult. So carers, they welcome the opportunity, but the expectation and the opportunity that is reinforced expectations that carers should be treated as partners in care rather than just add-ons to the system. But they're struggling with being seen in reality in the circumstances that happen each day on the ground. And I think that expectation of being a registered supporter is not landing well for carers in understanding how they should exercise that role. So the reforms have elevated these conversations about supported decision making, but many carers don't really know what good looks like in that respect. There's a real role to build the capability and capacity of carers, especially across the many communities that they work in or operate in. In terms of, so I think that opportunity is very clear. And as I've said, with the challenges, carers tell us that realising those rights in practice is harder, not easier at the moment, because the system itself is more complex. And that is natural in any system reform kind of circumstance. Implementation is always the hard part. We think the hard part is carving out the reforms and getting them over the line, but it's actually implementing them successfully and being iterative with that implementation as well. If we don't get implementation right in respect of the role of carers and that role being exercised to best effect, then carers feel like they are left holding the risk, compliance, and choice on behalf of older people without the support that they need to exercise that effectively and appropriately. So that may unintentionally undermine dignity and safety. So I think bottom line is that implementation must be carer-centred. They are absolutely critical and pivotal to the system. And when they're not effectively supported to exercise that role, ultimately care arrangements will fall over and that will put more cost and pressure on the service system. So there's a real win-win in getting this right. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Sharon. Yes, operationalising is always where the rubber hits the road, and getting it right is absolutely essential to embedding the change that the reform is intended to bring about. Can I go to you now, Anne, and ask you as a provider, how has this changed practices of your member organisations and, very importantly, the workforce? And how are they implementing this change?
Yes, this is an incredibly vast question. With reform of this magnitude, it really affects every corner of a provider organisation. I'll outline a range of activities that provider organisations have typically done since probably even ahead of the release of the final report of the Royal Commission, but certainly over the last 5 years. They have undertaken significant investments in transformation, and it has been in an environment of challenging financial sustainability and changing funding models as well. So it has required a lot of prioritisation and strategic planning on the part of provider organisations and the leadership of boards and CEOs and executive members. It has required significant investment in digital transformation because, as well as policy and legislative reform, it also has come with significant system reform in the part of government systems being uplifted and the need for provider systems and digital maturity to also uplift. And there is significant variability across the sector in that space and varying degrees of capacity and financial capacity to transform. So this is a work in progress. There has been substantial activity in relation to the quality of care and preparing for the strengthened aged care quality standards. Providers have spent time analysing their current state against the intended reforms, identifying gaps and adjusting operational policies and practices. This has at times been challenging when we have seen the concurrent development of policy with legislation and one might say less than optimal lead times to prepare an organisation for reform of this magnitude. They have also been very active in engaging and communicating with their participants and their families and supporters about the providers' local circumstances in relation to their approach to the reforms. This is really pivotal to providers' undertaking of governance requirements that are in the Act, such as having advisory groups that they engage with, including consumer advisory groups, as well as clinical governance advisory groups. They have also undertaken investment in training and development of their workforces in readiness for the new Act. And of course, this has been supported by guidance and materials and tools from the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission and the Department of Health, Disability and Ageing. And the provider sector has also been involved in informing some of the development of these materials. In addition, there has been substantial investment in administrative resources to implement the reform. The impact analysis for the new legislation showed that there would be an increase in administrative burden on the provider sector, and this has come at some cost, and it is a significant overhead that we are monitoring and are concerned about because the transition has resulted, particularly for support at home, in many workarounds that are requiring even more investment than possibly what was anticipated in terms of administrative support. We also, in relation to the workforce, are concerned and as are our providers concerned for and looking for ways to support their workforces in regard to reform fatigue. In addition to the lengthy period since the final report of the Royal Commission, there was also COVID, and the provider sector worked tirelessly to support the quality and safe care in a very complex environment during the COVID period, in addition to lead the transformation of aged care in the reform journey. So there have been opportunities for providers to manoeuvre their organisations in a strategic way and to prepare their organisations to deliver rights-based care that is person-centred. And I will say that many of our members speak to the work that they've done throughout, not just from the time of the Royal Commission, but prior to the Royal Commission in terms of person-centred care. So this is not something that just started on the commencement of a new Act. It's a continuation of work that providers have been doing and focusing on in their delivery of care and services day in and day out for older people.
Thank you, Anne. And look, we're getting some questions through from the audience, but we might just continue for a little way. I think we've got the time, and I'll come back to those questions. So, Bronwen, I have a question for you as well. From the perspective of the regulator, what does rights-based mean in practice for services and families? And how is the Commission driving this? Thanks, Bronwen.
Thank you, Jane, and thanks to Sharon and Anne. It was really great to hear your perspectives. So our rights-based approach begins with education and engagement that I talked a little bit before earlier, to support older people to understand their rights and to help providers to understand what best practice looks like and how to meet their obligations. More specifically around upholding rights, we do this in a number of ways. We uphold rights by resolving individual complaints, and this has involved a significant reframing of how we run our complaints processes and how we frame complaints, both in how we talk about them with the complainant and how we work with the provider that the complaint is about to resolve things. Focused more on the provider, our registration and re-registration processes are centred around the aged care quality standards, which are set up to bring the statement of rights to life. So the Act includes a statement of rights set out very explicitly. So there were quality standards in place under the previous regulatory model, but in response to the Royal Commission, the standards were strengthened with the intention of really embedding and driving the rights-based approach through all aspects of care. So when we do our audits against the quality standards, we're really looking for hard evidence from providers that demonstrates how they're bringing the statement of rights to life and how they're embedding rights in their day-to-day care. And we just started our audit program back in January under the new model. So again, it's early days. We'll see how things play out. I'm sure we'll learn a lot of lessons, but we're hoping to see some really great examples of where providers are sort of exceeding the minimum expectations that we can then build case studies around and provide some really practical examples to the sector and to older people and carers and supporters about what really great care looks like and what a rights-based care looks like. We also uphold rights by investigating individual incidents, and I mentioned the reporting scheme before, or investigating providers that have come to our attention through our intelligence gathering. And we also address what we call sector risks. So these are risks or issues that we're seeing play out across the sector, and we do this in a coordinated way. We call them campaigns. So we'll pick a particular topic or a risk that we see playing out, and we build a program of activity around that, and it might include education and engagement, could include some targeted intelligence gathering or requests for information from either a cohort of providers or the entire set of providers in the sector. And if needed, we will then target some compliance and enforcement action and then communicate, you know, what we did and the outcomes, so that there's sort of that loop there. So there's some of the practical ways that we're looking to uphold rights in the new model. Of course, we're only 4 months in, so the effectiveness of our work to embed the rights-based way of working and to test how effective providers are, these are all still questions that it's a bit too early to tell. But Sharon covered a lot of this, but for those who are involved in the aged care sector, or if you have parents or relatives in care, or follow the news, you will be aware that there's a number of issues and rub points around the implementation, for example, in how the new support at home program is playing out. And Sharon gave us some powerful examples of that. So we're watching these issues closely. We're hearing from stakeholders. We're working with the department, which does have some regulatory functions as well, and we're taking action. I won't go into the details in the interest of time, but if questions come up around that, we can perhaps talk about that a little bit later. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Jane.
Thanks, Bronwen. And look, I think that's a good segue into the next point of discussion. It is very early days. 4 months, that's no time at all, really. And on that point, so we've heard that this was a once-in-a-generation reform for the aged care sector, with major impacts for all participants, people receiving aged care and their support networks, aged care providers, workers, and government agencies, including the regulator. As regulators, we are more often than not implementing or operationalising regulatory reform in our sectors, and I think that's what we do. And I think the audience would love to hear and learn from your experiences. So I'm going to ask all of the panelists, how did you go about preparing your part of the sector for the changes? And in hindsight, with 4 months, what worked well and what are some of the reflections or lessons learned? And can I start with you, Anne?
Thanks, Jane. Yes, again, it's really interesting to be asked this question 4 months into the commencement of the Act when we've been living with the reforms and preparing for them for so long. And there is, I guess, a cycle, a policy trajectory that is followed in the course of these kinds of reforms. In terms of as being a provider peak, how we supported our members, I'll speak to our policy and advocacy initiatives, but I also note that Ageing Australia has a number of member relations and member-facing support, such as frontline call centres and opportunities to support members to understand and interpret reforms and legislation, but also have peer-to-peer discussions and learn from each other. But in relation to policy and advocacy, our providers were very active in reform design in the lead up to the passage of the Aged Care Act. We focus on using the many channels that we can offer as a peak body to understand the insights, issues, and possible ideas and solutions of our members, analyse that against the breadth, depth, and diversity of our membership, because we do have members ranging from 30-bed residential aged care facilities in regional Australia all the way through to multi-state, multi-service, large providers who have thousands of participants in their care. So it's really important to us that we're able to tap into that breadth in the development of our policy work. So we had hundreds of members participating in the development of countless submissions. I haven't counted them up. I think I should. There were many. But that means there were many opportunities for us to get the voice of our members into the policy development journey. We are now very active in escalating transition issues, working closely with the Department of Health, Disability and Ageing, the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission and Services Australia, as well as consumer peaks, including Council of the Ageing and the Older Persons Advocacy Network, known as CODA and OPAN. And we are all sharing our perspectives of emerging issues, examples, really practical examples from members on what a system might be looking like to them and why it isn't working, and informing agencies to alert them to the need to investigate those issues and be responsive to them. And that includes everything from system design through to program design. In terms of lessons learned, I think I would say from a policy perspective, there was a period of time, a really pivotal period of time in the lead up to the passage of the legislation where there was concurrent policy design with legislative drafting, as well as system development. Now, to have all of those really fundamental processes of reform happen concurrently was incredibly challenging to yield the insights of our members for well-designed reform. At times it appeared rushed, and that can bring risks for unintended consequences from reform. which is why we are being incredibly active in escalating transition issues, because we do think there is a need to manage the risks of that kind of concurrent policy and legislative development. I think one thing I would say to those in observing the webinar today who are involved in major reform is to look at who your stakeholders are and see them as clients of the reform. So they are not just delivering reform that you are designing or government is making decisions about. They are actually your agents of change to achieve the reform objectives. They are the engine room in the aged care circumstance. They are the engine room of delivering quality care and driving the achievement of policy objectives for older Australians, both now and into the future. They live day in and day out with a complex system, and they have a perspective of participants and the impact of program design on participants. And that perspective can be highly valuable in improving reform and improving policy and program design. I'd like to take the opportunity to commend the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission for its approach, for example, in preparing for the strengthened aged care quality standards. They took an approach of frequent and early communication and provision of advice. They undertook a pilot program for providers to be part of that was very well received by our members. And when we have polled our members in relation to their readiness for reforms in advance of 1 November, it was the area of the aged care quality standards for which they had the most confidence. And I do attribute that to the work of the Commission and the work of Ageing Australia and the work of our providers to invest in this space.
Thank you, Anne. Some real nuggets in there. Bronwen?
Thank you. Thanks, Anne. That was lovely to hear. So, for the Commission, as we've highlighted throughout today, the scale of the change was really immense and challenging. The Act was initially due to commence on the 1st of July 2025, so it passed Parliament late in 2024. Initially, it was supposed to start on the 1st of July 2025, but in early June, so only about three and a half weeks out, the government announced that the commencement date would be pushed back to the 1st of November 2025. And it was in response to feedback from the sector, including older people and their advocacy groups and providers, that there were concerns about the sector's readiness. And I think really those main concerns were around continuity of care and safety of care for older people. And so the government took the decision to push back by a few months. But for the Commission as the regulator, our preparations were twofold. So we had to help older people and their supporters, aged care provider boards and managers, workers understand what the new regulatory framework was going to look like and how we would regulate them. So what were the new rules and what could they expect from us? And we also had to prepare ourselves internally, and really that was a massive undertaking. We redesigned our operating model because it really was, the new Act really was so different for us. We really had to look at end-to-end how we're going to do things. So we did that early, and then we restructured our organisation to sort of reflect our new operating model. We brought in a new case management system, which is one of our core IT tools, as changing the existing case management system to meet the new legislation would have been too cumbersome. And that system went live on the 1st of November. And we had to use the old system up until the day before. We rewrote all of our internal policies and SOPs, and we trained our workforce. So that was really massive change journey for our own people. And I'll focus for a couple of minutes on what we did to help the sector. And then if we've got time, really happy to talk more about the internal change management if people are interested in that. But as Anne has mentioned this already, so I talked about the delay in the new Act commencing. There was also, a lot of this concurrent policy finalisation, a lot of the detail of how the Act was going to operate and how we were going to operate was contained in the rules. So they're the sort of subset of the legislation, and they were still being finalised throughout 2025. So we and providers and older people were dealing with quite a high level of uncertainty and complexity as that go live date rapidly approached. We took the approach that we couldn't wait for all the rules to be finalised before we started talking to the sector about how we would regulate. We had to go on what we knew, for example, by looking at the draft rules and the Act itself, and publish materials in a draft format with the commitment to update them as soon as we could. So this wasn't ideal, but we were upfront with the sector about our approach and they kept asking, can we consider this guidance to be final? And our answer had to be, well, no, it's not final because the rules are not yet finalised. They probably didn't love it, but I think they did appreciate our transparency and that we were putting out materials early. One thing that we decided to do was publish a forward calendar of when we would be releasing guidance about each key topic. So, for example, we said in January 2025, you will see lots of materials about the strength and quality standards. In February, you will see materials about provider registration and so forth. So that was a bit scary for us because it really pinned us down. It meant that we had to meet our own timeline. But I think it really helped the sector as they could plan ahead as best as possible, and they knew when to keep an eye out for new guidance as it was going to drop. We tailored our materials for our different audiences. So for complaints, for example, we put out a suite of resources for older people, a separate set for aged care workers who are doing that daily interaction that Sharon talked about before, and a third set for aged care board members and managers. And this let us tailor the detail, the type of language we used, even the look and feel of documents. And we based this on user research that we had conducted right back at the start of the process when the Act was being drafted in 2023. As well as targeting those different audiences, we replicated content across different products. So we would put out videos, fact sheets, web content, learning modules. One thing the sector really liked was customisable materials like PowerPoint presentations or discussion cards they could use with their own staff. So providers could adapt and insert their own content and policies, as well as what we were saying as the regulator, and that was really popular. And we published and touched on this, some really practical things like exposure drafts of forms that we would be asking providers to fill out, tools that they could use to list their evidence ahead of audits, and checklists. We listened to our audiences and adjusted our services to suit. So, for example, aged care providers told us that they wished our online learning programs could be uploaded into their own learning management systems. This would let them push out learning modules to their own staff and track completion rates. So we turned on that functionality, and we saw the engagement with our learning programs skyrocket, like in the hundreds of thousands of completions of modules that we had delivered for the sector. And in terms of reflections a few months in, I think what really worked well was the relationships we had across the sector, which Anne has touched on, but not just with providers, with older people and their peak groups as well, so people like COTA and OPAN. There were formal mechanisms like big meetings, but we also had really great one-on-one relationships and channels through which we could pick up the phone and just try and sort out issues constructively, or at least give each other a heads up on where there were issues coming to the fore. So as Anne said, I would really encourage everyone to really invest deeply in their relationships with stakeholders in the sector that you're serving. I would have liked to do more true co-design of materials. Because of those timing challenges, we couldn't do as much of that as we would have liked to. Where we could, we shared drafts of our materials with stakeholders, but that's not co-design. So I would have really loved to do more of that. We were able to co-design on some products. For example, we had a whole project centred around uplifting our support to First Nations older people, First Nations providers and mainstream providers who are providing care to First Nations people. We recognised that we really needed to improve what we were doing here. So we engaged a First Nations-owned company to provide us with specialist advice. We didn't have sufficient capability in-house at that point in time. They facilitated really in-depth co-design with communities. And we had a reference group that included a range of First Nations stakeholders who oversaw the work and had a chance to review them before we published them. So I'm really proud of that project and its outcomes. I think it provides us a really powerful blueprint that we can model for other parts of our work. But it did require that time and an investment, of dollars. Now in the Commission, we're building our own in-house First Nations capability, and we have established a First Nations policy unit. So that's a really great development. But I think there's always going to be the need to sort of invest deeply in our relationships and in our work with that part of the sector. But I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bronwen. And over to Sharon, and then we will move to questions that we're getting from the audience. Quite a few, actually. So over to you, Sharon.
Thanks, Jane. In terms of our role, we focus both on preparing the carer population, so close to 1 million carers in New South Wales, family and friend carers, as well as working with the aged care sector to support their understanding of the engagement of carers. And we do that both through our peak function as in terms of policy and advocacy, as well as through our role in Carer Gateway as a provider of services directly to carers. Our preparation for both carers and the sector focuses on reducing confusion and building shared understanding of what the reforms are about and how to best support carers through them. I think Bronwen talked a lot about communications and tailoring, and we've worked hard on that as well. We try very hard not to reinvent any communications, but rather to take what has been produced by the Commission and the sector and to help interpret that for carers as well as for the sector that we're working with, and making it as simple as possible. So we very much see our role as an interpreter. Through our role in the Sector Support and Development Program under CHSP, we've done extensive work with the aged care sector to build an understanding of carer inclusion and supported decision-making and the practical implications of this for the frontline. And we do see a lot of workers from aged care providers turn up to our sessions wanting to really understand what does it mean for me on a day-to-day basis. So that's where we try to have the most influence as well. We also focus heavily on carer inclusive practice at a provider sort of capability building level, especially in regard to how carers fit in the strength and quality standards and how engaging with carers early can reduce risk and service breakdown. In our Carer Gateway role, we have got a specialised team that is focused on supporting carers of older people because of the complexity of the changes. And we are collecting case studies and systemic issues from that work and feeding that into the Department of Health, Disability and Ageing, as are all Carer Gateway providers. So that's we have a really important role in helping to sort of join the dots between the different service systems. What has worked well is consistency and repetition. So we know that our carers and sector don't always get things the first time, and just repeating some of the messages and finding different ways to say the same thing is also really helpful to helping people navigate change. And as well as building trusted relationships with partner organisations to ensure that we're all on the same page and reinforcing those messages. I think that's probably the key lesson, is that with complexity, we need to find ways of making it simple, and it's not always simple, but that repeat of key messages and change, but then also listening to the feedback of audiences. So listening to what carers are telling us on a day-to-day basis, and then translating that into how can we continuously improve how we interface with them, but how can we also feed some of those stories and insights through to providers, the department, and probably less so directly to the Commission, because our key liaison point is the department. But this conversation is actually making me think more about that kind of broader joining of the dots piece. So yeah, probably key message to leave my comments on is, this reform, it's not a point in time. We all know that. This is the long game, and it's about just staying steady and consistent through the long game in order to bed down the full intent of the reforms for all concerned. Thanks, Jane. You're on mute, Jane.
Sorry. Thank you, Sharon and Bronwen. That was a very interesting section. A lot of lessons learned, and a lot of key themes that came through, like communication, stakeholder communication. That's such an important lesson. It's one that we know, but it's really good to have it reiterated. And the other thing that I found very interesting, Sharon, was repetition of communication. That's absolutely right too. And I think most regulators would resonate with um, that position that you have to, I guess, find ways to impart the same message many different ways, but continually people don't always get it the first time. And look, we have quite a few questions here, and I don't think I'm going to get through all of them. So I'm just going to look at some of them you may have touched on, but I think this first one is very interesting. So I'm just going to ask you if you could maybe give me noting the time, a quick answer, because potentially you've covered this off anyway, but um, what are the key enablers to support a smooth transition to the new way of working? Can you please outline this from regulators, providers, and consumers? So if we could just go around the room with key enablers, starting with you, Sharon.
Yeah, I probably have touched on this, but I guess just to sort of summarize quickly, I think key enabler is accessible and trusted information that is tailored to the different audiences that need to understand the impact of the reforms on them and how they can best engage and be part of it. And from a carer perspective, yes, how can they be a partner in care? The support for navigation and decision making, I think, is a key enabler. So it's a key aspect of the reform that hasn't quite landed yet for carers. So how can they be supported to exercise that role? And then the final one is that opportunity for feedback. So how can we make sure that the people that this is intended to serve, so older people and their carers, how can there be a very constructive feedback loop that can help feedback into providers and the Commission to keep those improvements live and iterative? Yeah, I was brief. I'll hand it back to you.
Sharon. And Anne, a couple of enablers?
Yes, Bronwen touched on it before, but what we didn't have in this reform were lead times, sufficient lead times. It compounded the pressures on providers from the pressure of the scale of the reform, the transformation required, but to do so without 6 to 12 months lead time that we were calling for once all the legislation and guidance was known and released. In the lead up to 1 November, the week ahead of 1 November, across various government agencies, there were approximately 200 releases of information online to the provider sector, aimed at the provider sector. That is in the week before the commencement of new legislation. So to me, an enabler is about preparedness, but the role of preparedness in giving confidence to those that are delivering the reform that they will be ready, able, and capable of delivering reform. So I think that that could have been done better in this case, and certainly encourage that for others hearing this and going through major reforms.
Thank you, Anne. And Bronwen?
Yeah, thanks. So maybe if I talk about internally, because I've already spoken externally and others have as well. I think one thing that worked really well for us was we took a really strong program management approach. So we ran this reform program that I touched on internally as a program of work and a number of projects underneath it. And we built project teams that included people from across the organisation, so our policy people, learning and development people, comms, IT, etc. So that sort of joined up Tiger Team kind of model, which built connections across the organisation, broke down silos, but really meant we had an organised and sort of organised and well thought through process. And, it was hard, but it worked really well. So I would definitely encourage regulators to run, whether it's a large scale reform or small scale, recognise it as a separate piece of work, resource it appropriately, and sort of run it as a project with all the discipline that comes with that.
Great advice. Thank you, Bronwen. Well, look, I'm going to make an executive decision here. We do have some more questions, but I think they could only generate quite extensive discussion. So probably we don't have time for them. But what I will do is circulate them to the panel, and they may decide that they would like to answer specific parts of them. They're very interesting questions. But it really is time for us to close. So I'd like to thank the audience for attending, and thank you very much to the panel for your time and your wisdom today. It's been a very interesting discussion. And for those in the Northern Territory and South Australia, we have 2 local events coming up. So please visit the NRCoP website for more information. Thank you very much, everybody.